the memory of all that. No, they can't take that away from me. The way you smile just beats, the way you sing off key, the way you haunt my dreams. No, they can't.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Edgware United Synagogue. People often say that nostalgia isn't what it used to be, and muse over what they consider a lost golden age which no longer exists, the so-called good old days. In America, we have a president who wishes to make America great again. And here in Britain, we also have had politicians wishing to make Britain great again, harking back to the era when Britannia ruled the waves. Tonight, we're going to look back at a long-lost time when most people took what we would now call a staycation, a holiday at the seaside, usually on the south coast. It was a time before mass travel abroad meant people looked for the four S's: sun, sand, sea, and seclusion. I know what you were thinking, but Harvey Weinstein wasn't invited. And for some, the idea of a holiday abroad was outrageous. Nowadays, with budget flights, booking holidays on the internet and Eurostar, things are totally different. One wag quipped that it's now families for the continent, Bournemouth for the incontinent. And it is to that golden era when for the Jewish community Bournemouth reigned supreme that we are going to hear tonight. And who better to recall that time than Geoffrey Feld? He was born on Christmas Day 1935 in the East End of London, where his parents owned the famous Feld's restaurant in Whitechapel Road. He grew up in London, but in 1950, the year after his parents bought the Cumberland Hotel, he moved to Bournemouth. Upon leaving school at 17, he studied accountancy for 7 years, and then in 1960 joined the family business. After his father's death in 1969, he became managing director of the company, during which year they acquired the Majestic Hotel in Bournemouth, thus having the dubious pleasure of running 2 Jewish hotels at the same time. In 1973, the Majestic Hotel was sold and the company purchased the Spider's Web Motel on the Watford Bypass, which he ran for 11 years, at which stage both the Cumberland and the Spider's Web were replaced by a chain of 4 non-Jewish hotels in Bournemouth. After 47 years in the hotel business, he retired in 2008. In the communal sphere, Geoffrey has been a past president of Bournemouth B'nai B'rith and founder of the former Hillel House in Southampton. He was founder and chairman of the Bournemouth Jewish Representative Council, and for many years has been a trustee and now senior trustee of the Bournemouth Hebrew congregation. In 1973, he became chairman of the Bournemouth JIA, and for over 20 years was a member of the national executive of JIA, as well as being for 10 years Southern Area chairman of JIA. He and Susan have 3 children and 7 grandchildren, all living in London, and they spend most of their time travelling backwards and forwards between London and Bournemouth and visiting Israel, where they have an extensive family. The Feld family are and have been synonymous with Bournemouth. Since I became involved with the Bournemouth community in 1997, I've seen Geoffrey work tirelessly with his wife Susan, who is here tonight, on behalf of the Hannah Levy House, a residential home which offers specialised personal-centred care for Jewish senior citizens. He devotes his time unstintingly to the Bournemouth Hebrew congregation, as I said, the longest-serving trustee of 3, and also conducts services, including Shabbos services at the shul. He also, I might add, knows a fair bit about the hotel business in Bournemouth. He has served as the secretary of the Bournemouth Accommodation and Hotels Association and has helped to boost tourism in the town over a long period. Recently, TripAdvisor crowned Bournemouth the UK's best beach and the 5th best in Europe, coming ahead of Sicily, Crete and Gran Canaria. So let us sit back and wallow in that glorious past of Jewish social history to the time when the town was better known as a wonderful holiday resort than a place with a football club in the Premier Division which beat Arsenal at home and thrashed Chelsea away.
I think he's said it all already. I don't think I need to say anything. I mean, Spencer's told us all about Bournemouth, all about the Jewish... Anyway, I do owe a thank you to Spencer, because about 12 years ago, when, as you know, Spencer's recently come to London from... Can you hear me, by the way? Is it okay? Because I can't hear whether you're... Is it okay? Right, fine. A bit louder. Tony, they wanted a bit louder. Okay, is that better? Okay, fine. You probably all know Spencer spent many years in Bournemouth, a key member of our shul in Bournemouth Hebrew congregation, and as such, he was chairman of our adult education program, which ran every Monday night without fail. And I believe he was telling me before, he only does it once a month here, so he's got it very lightly here in Edgware. So about 12 years ago, I think it must have been, he said to me, Geoffrey, he said, why don't you do a talk on the Jewish hotels in Bournemouth? Nobody knows them better than you do. And so as a result of that, I did a lot of research, and I came up with this talk, which I've been doing for quite a few years now. Actually, I haven't done, this is my first one for quite some time. But previous to that, I've been speaking to WITSO, to League of Jewish Women, to Ladies' Guilds. I've been as far as Leeds to speak to WITSO up there, so it's a busy talk. Anyway, first thing, it's very interesting when I do these talks, when people come up to me and I remember them, or I pretend to remember them, like my mother used to do. No, it's not true. I do remember them, and we have a little chat about the old days. And a gentleman came up to me just before, about half an hour ago, and gave me a menu from the Cumberland Hotel, dating back to the pre-election night of 1964. And he's given me a copy. It's quite amazing, actually. And where have I done with it? Yeah. That's a copy. What is the gentleman? Where is he? Yeah. Sorry, I keep forgetting your name.
The surname is now the first name is
Leon. Leon Matt. Now I know this guy. I was articled to Percy Phillips & Co. when I was doing accountancy, and he worked for Percy Phillips & Co. and he actually did the audit of the Cumberland for 3 years running. That's why he's got the menu here. So it's very funny, actually, because it's dated October 1964, and it's got the dinner which reads, you'll remember some of these names, we use the names of the political parties and the leaders of the parties, so it's got the hors d'oeuvre, as we used to call them. We don't call it hors d'oeuvre, we call it starters now. I preferred hors d'oeuvre, actually, much more select. Grimmond grapefruit. And then you had electors' meatballs a la Wilson. Candidates consommé with floating voters. Brown, I can't even read it, it's socialist sprouts, liberal helping of potatoes, Tory tart, independent ice cream, constituent and it goes on like that. So we were quite imaginative in those years. Anyway, that's just a sideline. Let's get to the main business now. Now, first of all, can we have a show of hands of how many people have... by the way, this talk is not just about the Cumberland Hotel or the Majestic, which I was associated with for many years, but about all the Jewish hotels in Bournemouth. How many people, I want hands up, who have stayed in a Bournemouth Jewish hotel? Hands up. Well, it's not surprising, because if you didn't, you probably wouldn't be here tonight. You know, Spencer's told you from my CV, I was born on Christmas Day, 1935. You can work out how old I am, which is pretty old, actually. My parents, as he said, ran the Feld's restaurant in Whitechapel Road. And actually, you can pass this round. I've got a picture here of Feld's Restaurant, which shows my father and my mother. You can see behind the window here, some of you who are old enough to go back that far, because on the window, on the other side of the window, it says, "Best wishes from Eddie Cantor." In 1935, 36 or 37, Eddie Cantor came to the East End, accompanied by the mayor of New York and my uncle Hyman, who was a resident in New York, who was very friendly with the mayor of New York. They all came over, and they had a banquet at Feld's Restaurant for Eddie Cantor, who was the star. Talk about the Oscars the other night. He would have won the Oscar if they were around at that time. And he came to the East End, as he put it, to visit my Jewish people. And the crowds, thousands of people turned out to welcome Eddie Cantor. And this is just a picture of that. The day I was born, my father, as you'll see here in this photograph when you pass it around, was cutting salt beef on the counter. He was the best brisket cutter. You know, the best cutter, slicer of brisket, is one who does the thinnest, because then you get the most profit, okay? If you do thin, you get real profit out of it. So he was cutting salt beef, and he needed my mother very urgently. So he said, "Bluma," you remember my mother's name, Blumenfeld? He said, "Bluma," and she wasn't around. So he called her, and he said to one of the waiters, he says, "Where's my wife? Where's Bluma?" He said, "She's gone to hospital. She's having the baby." He said, "What?" So he took off his white jacket, dashed to the car, and they took him to the hospital, and I was born. 4.5 pounds. I wish I could lose that now, actually. Right, I'm going to pass this round. Okay. I suppose the Jewish hotel business in Bournemouth started soon after the First World War. My mother, who died 10 years ago, she was aged 99 when she died, told me when she married my father in 1927, they went for their honeymoon in Blackpool for 1 week. After a couple of days, she told my father she didn't like it at all there. You know, she was a bit of hoich offense to my mother. She liked the best places. Blackpool didn't suit her. So he suggested, my father, that they travel down to Bournemouth for the rest of their honeymoon. They only had one week, you know, they didn't go to, nowadays they go to exotic places all over the world. My parents went to Blackpool. When he telephoned Bournemouth, a couple of the hotels that were there at the time, and inquired about the prices, it was much more than they could afford. So they decided to stay put. All the years after, my mother never forgave my father for that. By the 1920s, this is a bit of history, so bear with me just a little while. It's a bit of history to start with. We'll get on to the fun stuff a bit later, okay? By the 1920s, the wave of Jewish immigration into England during the latter half of the 19th and the early part of the 20th century had put down their roots, and after the traumas of the 1914-18 war, they started to think about holidays with their families. I stress the word families because that was the backbone of the business, a family holiday. And naturally, as Spencer put it before, sun, sea, and sand was their first choice to get away from the smog and grime of the big cities where they had settled. London, Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, Newcastle, Cardiff, Liverpool, Glasgow, and all the other smaller but equally vibrant provincial communities in Britain. And the resorts they headed for, Margate and Cliftonville, Southend, I'm already bringing back the names from years ago, you remember this, Southend and Westcliff, Brighton and Hove, Torquay, Blackpool, St Anne's and Southport, Llandudno and Colwyn Bay, and of course, the jewel in the crown, Bournemouth. Why Bournemouth? Then, because as it is today, still the same, sophisticated, smart, picturesque, clean, with a perfect climate. Is that right, Spencer? All those things? A cut above all the others, with 8 miles of golden sands and only 100 miles from London. I should get the job as the Bournemouth tourism officer, I think would be a good idea. Thus, Bournemouth became, for 40 years, until the 1960s, the #1 choice for Anglo Jewry to visit for their holidays. As in the other resorts, it started with guest houses and small hotels, which eventually, in the case of Bournemouth, became large hotels. When I started preparing my material for this talk, I suddenly realized I knew nothing about the Jewish hotels in Bournemouth before 1949, the year my parents opened the Cumberland. So I talked to a number of old Bournemouth residents, including the Richmond sisters from the Green Park, former owners of the Green Park, and I was amazed at the number and the variety of guest houses and hotels open to the Jewish public in the 25 years from the end of the First World War until the end of the World War II. Probably the first real hotel was the Eastcliff Court. It's now a 4-star non-Jewish establishment, and that was opened in the late 1920s by Mrs. Morris, and it was later run by her daughter, Mrs. Hayman, and her husband. Even I, who only came to Bournemouth when I was 14 years old, remember it as a very anglicized Jewish hotel, not under any religious supervision, no Herrscher at all. And in the 1960s, it was eventually sold to the company which then owned the Carlton Hotel in Bournemouth. There was also, during this period, the Court Heath Hotel, located in Derby Road and run by Mr. and Mrs. Stock. But the first expansion really took place in the 1930s, with the opening of the Miramar, owned by Douglas Steele. That's now a non-Jewish hotel, by the way, but very nice. The Barocha Hotel on the West Cliff. What could be a better name for a Jewish hotel than the Barocha Hotel? The Maryvale Hotel, Maryvale Hall, run by Danny Rosenthal, who was once the president of the Bournemouth Hebrew congregation, and the Eastcliff Manor for years, which was owned by the Miller family, has developed as a block of flats like at other places. And the Trouville Hotel, near the Bournemouth International Centre, which was owned by Herman Polikoff and his wife, who were great friends of my parents. Many of the local Jewish people, the young people, speak with well, they're not young anymore, they're pretty old now, if they're still around. Many of them are not here on this earth anymore. They spoke with great fondness of the Trouville Hotel, which was open to the local community for dinner dances and became a popular rendezvous for young Jewish people in the area. Around the mid-1930s, several hotels were built in Bournemouth, all designed by the same architect. Don't worry about that. By the same architect in the same Art Deco style of architecture. And if I mention the hotels, you'll recognize what it was. They were the Palace Court, the Green Park, the Cumberland, and the Ambassadors. The latter, the Ambassador Hotel, became a Jewish hotel in the late 1930s, and it survived as such for nearly 70 years. And you may remember, many of you, Al Fickers, who ran the Ambassador Hotel with his family, who died some years ago, who gave considerably donations to Jewish causes. It ceased being a Jewish hotel in January 2007, and now it's one of a chain of national hotels throughout the country. But the golden age of the Bournemouth Jewish hotels was yet to come. And whilst a lot of hotels in Bournemouth were requisitioned during the Second World War, the Americans and the Canadians took a number of the hotels over for their forces. It wasn't until Ruby Marriott and his family moved to Bournemouth in 1943 from Torquay, where they owned the Sandringham Hotel, that things started to happen. they quickly established the Green Park as a first-class 60-bedroom Jewish hotel under the Beth Din, and was soon followed by Fay Schneider at the Majestic, which had 90 rooms, and at the end of the war, there was Morris Guild at the Langham, which is now called the Queen's, opposite the Ambassador Hotel, which now all changed names, now called the Britannia, and the Normandy Hotel, run by Nat Lee. In Boscombe, there are a number of smaller hotels, Jewish hotels, I'm talking, notably the Florence Hotel, run by the Siegel family. But the golden age came with the end of the Second World War, when the Big Eight, as I call them, in alphabetical order, I do it in alphabetical order so nobody should be annoyed, nobody should get gefrunzelt. They were the Ambassadors, who had 102 rooms, the Cumberland had 104 rooms, Eastcliff Court 60, Eastcliff Manor the same, Green Park also 60, the Langham Majestic had 90 rooms, and the Normandy 70 rooms. All these hotels, 8 large hotels, offering all of them over 50 bedrooms, a total Jewish hotel bedrooms in Bournemouth of approximately 600 bedrooms. It was actually a very big slice of the hotel industry in Bournemouth. As in the case after the Great War, in 1945, Anglo-Jewry, despite the new knowledge of the Holocaust, decided it was time once again to enjoy themselves. Remember, this was the time before cheap, and Spencer touched on it before cheap air travel and packaged holidays. All you had to do was to get in your car or onto a train, and in a few hours you were at your favorite destination. You didn't worry about a passport, no Brexit, no euro, all this nonsense, no foreign currency, and to hotels for which you were entirely familiar with, and above all, they were Jewish, and they were mostly kosher. Now, my parents were the last to start in the field of the big Jewish hoteliers, and they didn't open the Cumberland until Pesach 1949. As most of you know, and I mentioned it before, they, along with my grandparents, were successful restaurateurs in Whitechapel Road, in the East End of London, and my father was actually the first licensee of the Kashrus Commission, and my grandfather, his father, Zayda Feld, actually taught Maury Bloom the kosher restaurant business, believe it or not. At the end of the Second World War, 1946, my father said, I must go and visit my brother Hyman in New York, who had been there since the 1930s. So he went to the USA, and he spent a couple of weeks in New York, and during that time, Uncle Hyman took him to a hotel on Long Island. It was called the Long Island Hotel, something like that. It was one of these beautiful, brand new, in that time, American hotels, very modern, right on the beach with the swimming pool and all the facilities. And then he had a wonderful time. When he came back to London, at that time, in 1946 already, the restaurant business, all the businesses in the East End were packing up and leaving. All the schmutter merchants, as they were at the time, which they were a large proportion of those were the business from my parents' restaurant, they were moving to the West End. They didn't even live in the East End anymore. They were moving to Northwest London, and so on. So the businesses in the East End were failing, were going down. And my parents realized at that time that it was time Fels Restaurant moved to something else. So my father came back to London. He said, Bloomer, he said, I've got a good idea. He said, this is what we're going to do. He said, we'll sell the business here, we'll move to New York, and I will open up a hotel, a Jewish hotel in New York. She said, Isaac, she said, you want to go to New York? Go to New York. She says, I'm staying here. She said, however clever you are, she said, the Americans will eat you up. So that was the end of my father's New York adventure. And of course, she didn't want to go. She had all the family who was in London, all her friends, and then this is how it evolved, the Cumberland Hotel. A few months later, my grandfather hadn't been well, so they went down to Bournemouth for a week and they stayed at the Ambassador Hotel. And my parents went down on a Thursday or Friday for a weekend, and they stayed with my grandparents at the Ambassador Hotel. So on the Saturday, Shabbos morning after shul, they took a little spazieren along the cliff top there, okay? And like everybody did in those days, to see who was going around and so on and so forth. So coming towards them was a distant cousin of my father. And his name was Joe Lippmann. Now, Joe Lippmann came over from the continent before the war. Very, very clever man. So clever, he could hardly read English. But everything was up here in his head. He was brilliant. While everybody was selling property in the West End during the war, because of the war, as soon as they sold, Joe was in there buying the property up. By the end of the war, he was a multi-millionaire. And he'd already bought the Palace Court at the time in Bournemouth and also the Cumberland. And as he came towards my parents, he greeted my parents after he was a distant cousin of my father, and he said, Lippmann Isaac says, I'm so glad to see you, I was going to ring you anyway. He said, I'll tell you why. He said, I recently bought the Cumberland Hotel. He said, but what do I know about the hotel? He says, property, I can tell you everything about. He said, hotels, I know nothing about. He said, so I had this idea, if you would come in partnership with me to the Cumberland Hotel, we could go and we would make a tremendous success of it together. So it just so happens, as they were talking, they were right opposite the Cumberland Hotel. He says, so my mother said, can we have a look at it? So Joe said, obviously. So they went over, and my father looked at it. It was exactly the sort of thing. Here was a brand new, it was only 10 years old then, a brand new, beautiful, modern hotel, exactly the sort of thing that he'd seen in New York, in America. Here it is. It's the brochure. I'll pass this around. I think we've sure seen it before. Put it over there. And they loved it. So they went back. So they said to Joe, well, we'll have to think about it because they had to pay for it, obviously. It wasn't so easy to pay for their share. So they went back, and my mother said, who was always the cautious one. It was actually strange because different personalities. My mother, I'm sure many of you met and knew my mother, Bloomer, the hostess with the mostess, right? She was very outgoing. In 5 minutes, she knew your whole life history. And my father was the quiet person in the background, but when it came to matters of doing things and seeking new projects, my mother was very cautious. She didn't like to take a chance. My father was a bit of a gambler. So she said to Dad, she said, it's all very well, Isaac, but who are we going to pay for this? He wants a lot of money for it was going to be a 50-50 partnership in the Cumberland. So Dad said, we'll find the money, don't worry. That evening, they had some friends staying at the Majestic Hotel. So after dinner, my father said to my mother, let's stroll over to the Majestic. It wasn't very far, as you know. And we'll go and visit these friends of ours. So they walked over, and as they stepped into the Majestic Hotel, Mrs. Schneider was there. She was standing, she always stands in the hall like this, and actually, she was a wonderful hotelier, Mrs. Schneider, I've got to say this, and a great personality. But as my parents stepped in, she knew them. She said, Mr. and Mrs. Fell, what are you doing here? So my parents said, well, we've just come to see some friends. She said, no, you haven't. You've come to look around my place. She says, I know what's going on. She said, you're going into competition with me. And with that, she said, they tried to protest that this wasn't the case, but she wasn't having any. So with that, they turned on their heel and they left. So it just shows you how quick networking goes. When even in those days, without without the social networking on the Twitter and the Facebook and all this stuff, within 5 minutes of my parents seeing Joe Lippmann on the seafront and going into the hotel to the Cumberland, it was all round. Mrs. Schneider knew already. One of her clients had obviously gone back and say, "Oh, Bloomer and Isaac Feld have gone into the Cumberland Hotel. They're going to buy it, and they'll be in competition to you." And she was worried about it. Quite rightly, because it was competition. Anyway, to cut a very long story short, they managed to get the money together, thanks to some help from some of the members of the family, and they opened the Cumberland in Pesach 1949, and it never looked back, for a time anyway. When they opened the Cumberland, which was very modern in those years, a hotel, 104 bedrooms, became the largest Jewish hotel in Europe and Bournemouth, and was second only to the Catskills in New York State. And Bournemouth, sorry, I made a mistake here. Bournemouth was second only to the Catskills in New York State in its range and variety of Jewish hotels. The Cumberland was full when it opened in Pesach 1949, as was the Green Park when it opened in 1943, and all those hotels, the Jewish hotels, looked to many prosperous years ahead with nothing in the future that could mar their progress. Little did they know. There was intense competition, especially amongst those hotels under kosher license, but everyone knew their place in the tariff's pecking order. For many years from its opening, the Green Park, start laughing now, charged 2.5 guineas a day. And each year the Cumberland was always 10 shillings, or 50p in today's money, less than the Green Park, with the Ambassador and the Majestic 10 shillings less than the Cumberland, and the Langham and Yusuf Manor another 10 bob behind that rate. In that way, nobody tried to steal a march on the other hotels, although each hotel tried to be better with their food, their service, accommodation, and also the entertainment. So when they did the tariff every year, the Green Park struck their rate, and everybody followed on with those margins behind them. It was easy, no haggling, no thing. And remember, as I said before, in those years, very few people travelled abroad. And what's more, there was those who are older in this audience will remember, there was a £50 limit on what you could take with you, and credit cards weren't invented yet. So I'm going to divert a bit onto one of my pet themes today, when our grandchildren say to my wife and I, who's sitting over there, Susan, there she is over there, the beautiful lady over there, when our grandparents say to us, "Grandpa, you're ruining our future by voting for Brexit." It's rubbish. I said to them, "No, we're voting for your future because we want Brexit." They said, "Well, how are we going to travel around Europe? Now you can travel anywhere. You can go here, you can go to this country, to that country." What did we do all those years ago? We had separate passports. We didn't have credit cards. We had a £50 limit on what we could spend, but they still did it. So all this mansa, all this rubbish about traveling around Europe, which our grandchildren so love to do, they'll still be able to do it. By 1950, the 8 large Jewish hotels in Bournemouth offered a standard of excellence never before seen outside America, and Israel was still in its infancy. Consequently, all the cream of Anglo Jewry came to Bournemouth, captains of industry, prominent Rabbonim and Dayanim from all over the world, and top professional people from all walks of life. The Bournemouth Jewish hotels became the greatest place to meet other Jews and also to find a wife. And there she is over there. I found her in the Cumberland Hotel propping up the bar, but she wasn't drinking at the time, so it was okay. My mother, God rest her soul, made hundreds of shidduchs. She was the great. If I had £5 for every shidduch she made, I would have retired 10 years earlier. Every summer was packed. Every holiday was sold out. We had, I'm talking not just the Cumberland, all the Jewish hotels, they had 7-day bookings only from Sunday to Sunday during the summer, from after Pesach, from, say, Shavuos onwards through to the Jewish holidays, through to Rosh Hashanah, you could only come Sunday to Sunday unless you lived in Scotland, because on Sunday they didn't have trains. Believe it or not, in those years, there were no trains travelling from Scotland, from Glasgow, down to the south. So, especially for the Scots, we had quite a few people from Glasgow, from Aberdeen, from Inverness, all these places, and from Edinburgh, and we used to do them Monday to Monday instead. Right. And there was also, interesting enough, there was a limited number of children during the season. Now, my father didn't like, I told you before, he was a very quiet man. Right, Cyril? I got a very good friend of mine, Cyril Barnett, sitting over there. Stand up, Cyril. So everybody, don't stand up, everybody knows who you are. I've known him all my life. Cyril's father-in-law, Alec Copstein, was our catering manager. He was originally top chef at Fell's Restaurant. When my parents opened the Cumberland Hotel in Bournemouth, they persuaded Alex to come down and run the whole of the catering operation in Bournemouth at the Cumberland Hotel. That was Cyril's father-in-law. And his great-grandson, stand up, come on, you're in the limelight now, is right, that's Alex's great-grandson. Give him a big round of applause. Yes. He was a wonderful caterer. There was no better man than him. He knew everything about Yiddishkeit, about kashrut, and his catering was just superb. But as far as children were concerned, my father, as I said, he was a quiet man, didn't like children. So he used to come at the beginning, before the season started, he used to come to the head receptionist and said, right, he said, let's look through the book. He said, from June, I only want maximum 20 children. In July, only 15 children. In August, the height of the season, I don't want more than 10 children. God forbid, if they had more than 10 children in August, there was a price to pay. And my father also had a black book of people that he's very stickler for tradition, my father, and for discipline. And he used to have this black book, which the black book consisted of all those people he didn't want to stay in the Cumberland Hotel. People who ate too much food, argumentative people who came to the desk and the reception and banged on the desk like this, demanding this, that, and the other. And these people were all noted down, people who complained too much, and they went in the black book. So before every, so it was okay, they could come in the winter when we weren't that busy, but during the summer we didn't need them. Every Christmas and New Year was fantastic. Christmas and New Year was a 10-day booking. You came Erev Christmas, you stayed right through all the period, right through New Year's Day, and you went the following day. And not just the Cumberland, again, I repeat, not just the Cumberland, it was all the Jewish hotels. And the cabaret, every night, was wonderful cabaret. And this are some of the names, and this is only some of them. You'll remember them all. Who were performed at either the Cumberland, the Green Park, the Ambassador, all these, Benny Hill, Bob Monkhouse, Peter Sellers. Peter Sellers came to the Cumberland when he was still with the Goons, before he became famous as a film star. Peter Sellers, Ron Moody, who played in Oliver, Anne Shelton, famous vocalist, Alma Cogan, they dubbed her the girl with a laugh in her voice. Actually, I didn't like her voice very much, but it was okay. Unfortunately, she died young, Alma Cogan. Tommy Trinder, Larry Adler, our harmonica player, Stubby Kaye, the famous American comedian, Ralph Slater, the hypnotist. He came a lot, hypnotized everybody, hypnotized so much they couldn't stop eating when they came out of the trance. Ray Ellington, it never appeared at the Cumberland, but the Ray Ellington Quartet, great band. But he appeared several Christmases at the Green Park. And one Christmas, I remember, I was probably about 20, 21, whatever it was, and I don't know if any of you were listening to the background music when you came in. There was some singing. That's me, actually. My tape, which I did for my grandchildren when I was 80 years old, a couple of years ago, 2 years ago. I made an album of 10 tracks, so I gave it to my grandchildren to remember me that I could do something in my life. So I used to do a lot of singing, and I went one night with my friends over to the Green Park. All the boys used to go from one hotel to the other just to see who was around. And Ray Ellington, who knew me from previously, said, "Geoffrey, come up and do a couple of numbers." So I went up to a couple of numbers, which was fine, well received. And the following morning, my father had a telephone call from Ruby Marriott, Green Park. So he said, "Isaac?" He said, "Yes, Ruby, how are you?" He said, "Fine." He said, "But Geoffrey was in the Green Park last night." So Dad said, "So?" He said, "Well, he did some numbers with our band. So did some songs with the band." So my father said, "Yes." So Ruby said, "Look, with the greatest of pleasure, he can come into the Green Park and enjoy and whatever." He said, "I don't want him to sing." I must have been a really bad singer in those years. Anyway, that was fine. Ray Ellington, Freddie Starr, Eddie Calvert, the man with the golden trumpet, you remember him? Morris Winnick, the band. That was another band which appeared at the Green Park one Christmas. And one night, I think it was Christmas night, they played the carol Silent Night. No, Silent Night, oh, whatever. Yes, we're in Shua, I shouldn't say it. And everybody was dancing to a foxtrot. Now, those younger people in the audience, I don't know if you know what a foxtrot is, I'm sure you do. So all the people were dancing to Silent Night to the foxtrot. The following morning, Diane Swift rang up Ruby Marriott. Said, "Ruby, morning, Diane, how are you?" He said, "Not very good this morning." He says, "Why? What's the problem?" He says, "It's been reported to me, Jewish, you see the social net, we didn't need Twitter and all this networking and those. What do we want it for? We had our own, the Jewish people still have their own social network. In 5 minutes, everybody knew what was going on." So in no time, the Diane knew. He said to Ruby, he said, "Last night it's been reported to me that your band played a Christmas carol." So Ruby said, "Did they?" He said, "Yes, I'll tell you which carol it was. It was Silent Night." So Ruby said, "Oh, I didn't realize." He said, "Your band should not be playing Christmas carols in a Jewish hotel under the auspices of the Beth Din." So he said, "You're in danger," he said, "of losing your license if you carry on this way." So Ruby, of course, apologized profusely, and that was the end of the matter. It just shows you how quick and how efficient the Beth Din was in those days. And following on with the names, all the great Jewish comedians of the day, Harold Behrens, David Kossoff, Bernard Spear, he was my favorite actually, Bernard Spear, and they all came. Now, let's recall a typical day in the stay of a guest at a Jewish hotel, otherwise known as the Big Fress. 9 o'clock in the morning, mind you, it's a shame now because I'm telling these things now, but when you go around the world, especially when you go to Israel, the things that we did in those days, really, it was wonderful in those days, but they pale slightly into insignificance because when you go to Israel and you see what they provide, and you've all been, you've all done it, and you all got the T-shirt, the breakfasts are fantastic. But in those years, remember, this was after the war. It was not long after rationing had ceased, and everybody were chalashing for food. But it's not the war now. Why are we still chalashing for food? Anyway, so 9 o'clock in the morning, everybody came down, the big breakfast. You had eggs. Mind you, One thing the Israeli hotels don't do, which we did, was kippurs, which were wonderful. There was all kinds of different eggs. Everything was on the table. No buffet in those years. You know, nowadays, whatever hotel you go to, no matter how posh a hotel is, you've got to go to the buffet to help yourself, to all the different breakfasts and so on. In those years, the Jewish hotels used to serve the breakfast to the tables. And it was the most difficult meal from the staff point of view because everything was a la carte. Okay? At 10:30 a.m., when breakfast was finished, they had a stroll on the cliff top to see who was around, who they were going to meet, and who they were going to gossip to next. But 11:30, they had to be back in the hotels because we were serving coffee and biscuits. At 1 o'clock, there was who eats a big lunch these days? Not many people. In those days, you know, most of us now, even when we're on holiday, we have a sandwich, whatever it is, a salad for lunch, because we don't want to put on weight and so on. But in those years, we ate, or they ate. 1 o'clock, there was a 4-course lunch, usually milky, okay? And you had beautiful gâteaux, wonderful cheesecakes at the end. Cyril will remember, because his father-in-law concocted a lot of the stuff. Where is he? Gary! This is Alex's son over there. I haven't seen him for a few years. How are you, Gary? Gary will bear out. He was my nephew, Ricky, best friend. The two of them were together. And every after the Seder nights, at Pesach, the two of them used to go around, because we had all the wine was poured, and all the stuff, a lot of stuff was left over, bottles of wine, and the wines in the wine glasses. Now, don't tell anybody I'm going to tell you this, because we'll be in trouble for the health and safety these days, hygiene. But Gary and my nephew, Ricky, used to go around all the tables, pouring all the wines in the glasses used to pour into jugs, right, were left over. The wine bottles used to top up so they became used the following night, right? But the wine in the glasses was okay. You may think it's, you know, a bit shady, right, Gary? But we used to use it for wine sauce. So we had like lokshen pudding. Your dad used to make sure all the wine in the jugs, which were poured in, used to boil them up so they had hot wine sauce for the following day for lunch with the lokshen pudding or whatever they were serving. So nothing was wasted. Okay. So I had a big milky lunch. And at 2:30 p.m., when they came out, like this, what did you do? Either you go for another nice walk along the cliff top to get some of those calories off you, or else if you were a card. Now, cards were a big thing in Jewish. In fact, I think I should tell you that, and you probably know this, that the biggest gamblers in the world are the Chinese, and next to the Chinese are the Jews. So when it came to cards, whether it was bridge, poker, kaluki, gin rummy, and all these other games, card tables were full in the afternoon of Jewish people playing cards, if they didn't go for a walk. But make sure you're back from your walk and finish your card game at 4 o'clock, because we're serving tea, okay? And the afternoon tea just wasn't a cup of tea. It was a full gamut of sandwiches and cakes and biscuits and gâteaux and you name it, they had it. And after tea, you're getting a little bit full up. So what do you go and do? Any offers? Schloff! You go upstairs to your room and you have a nice little lay down before dinner, but make sure you're down at 7 o'clock for your big dinner. Now, by 6:45, there was already a queue outside the dining room doors, but the maitre d' wouldn't let anybody in until 7 o'clock because they weren't ready in the kitchen, but they were waiting. So they had a very big dinner. It was all usually meaty. Fleischig was always the dinner in the evening, was always fleischig. And it was followed by coffee or lemon tea. And then at 8:30, the ballroom. Now, every hotel had its own band. Every night, except, of course, Friday night, we put on other entertainment. Gary, you'll remember, and so we used to put on quiz shows on Friday night. We used to have a brains trust. We had a lot of, as I said before in my talk, a lot of very prominent people of business, Rabbonim, Dayanim. So we had always managed to get a very good brains trust. And people used to put in questions before Shabbos, and that was really a good evening. But all the other evenings, there was a band. And the Cumberland, a couple of the hotels had a gigolo, right? But the Cumberland had to have 2 gigolos. We had 2 because, God forbid, some of the ladies weren't asked to dance, there was going to be big trouble. So we had 2 gigolos. And then, at 10 o'clock, we haven't finished yet, you're not gone to bed yet, there was evening tea and cakes served. Now remember, all this was in the price of 2 guineas a day or 3 guineas a day, whatever the era we were in. And then, of course, on Saturday, after Shabbos, at midnight, we served saveloys, crisps and cucumbers, or on holiday times, we even used to serve salt beef sandwiches at midnight. And then, of course, Shabbos came, and there was the famous, all the hotels, the famous Kiddush buffet and alcohol. Let's talk about alcohol. Jewish people are not alcoholics, as you know. We don't go in for alcohol very much. So we had a barman, Spanish barman. What was his name, Susan? I can't remember his name now. Bill. Oh, no, he was the English one. Bill. No, the other Spanish guy. So one day I was walking through, one evening during the week, I was walking through the bar. I had a beautiful bar in the Cumberland, very nice. Small, but it was beautiful. And the Spanish, I think his name was Sergio. So I go through the bar, and Sergio is sitting behind the bar on his stool. Er schluft. I said, Sergio, wake up. Why are you sleeping? He said, I don't have any business. Just then, a Mr. Cohen walks through. This is true, I'm not telling a story. Mr. Cohen walks through. I said, Mr. Cohen, you like a nice drink, don't you? I said, why don't you come to the bar, have a drink? I said, you know, we've got some beautiful wines with whiskey and all this sort of stuff. He said, me? I've finished a drinker. No, I'm not a drinker. And off he says, leave me alone. So he went off inside the lounge. But when he came to Shabbos and the Kiddush, as soon as the rabbi and the shkiach made the Kiddush, who was in the forefront of the alcohol, the buffet table? Mr. Cohen. He was there, and he said to the head waiter, make it a double, make it a double. So we do drink from time to time. And every Jewish holiday, never mind Christmas and New Year, was also packed out. Pesach was a 10-day booking, and we used to close the hotel 1 week before Pesach in order to get ready. And that was the hardest time for your dad, Gary, when they had to close the hotel, because the kitchens were not just the hotel, but the kitchens, we had obviously 2 kitchens, the milk kitchen, the glacier kitchen, it had to be cleaned from top to bottom, everything had to be changed, the cutlery, the crockery, it was a big, big operation. Rosh Hashanah was also a very busy time. We had always a resident chazan or a resident rabbi used to come for the whole of the Jewish holidays. And let me tell you about Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, for obvious reasons, wasn't that busy, but we had a hotel which was probably 60% full that time. And we had room service on the floor, okay, for serve breakfast and other things, and during the day. Yom Kippur, room service was the busiest room service for the whole year. Because we used to ask the people, if you want anything in the room, if you can't fast, or you're ill, or you're too old, you can't fast, you're allowed to eat. Limited, no such thing in Jewish. So, but they had to put in their order before. Well, in normal times we had 2 girls in the room service. So Yom Kippur we used to have 6. And the whole day they were running up and down to all these rooms, serving food. It was unbelievable. And then Sukkos and Simchas Torah was also one where we had our own sukkah. Again, all the hotels had their own sukkah. And who was it tonight? Cyril, you told me you were Chusn Torah one year with, who with? With Robert Brody. Robert?
I don't think I was Chusn Torah. I was there Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. I don't think so.
Yeah, I thought Cyril told. Anyway, okay. I know somebody came over and said it was. Anyway. Now, another thing regarding food. When I started in the hotel business, after I failed my accountancy exams twice, my finals, I hated accountancy, so I went into the family business. So, after a while, after a year or so, in those years, all the guests from all the Jewish hotels used to go from one hotel to the other, because they could. They went to visit their friends, but what they used to do, they didn't have main meals, but they used to come in, they could have coffee or tea if it was afternoon tea, or in the evening come and join and have the entertainment, and they could have whatever was going in the lounge, in the ballroom, they could have it. No charge to their hosts who were the guests of the hotel. I remember very distinctly, one August, I was on duty during the afternoon, it was tea time, and I went in the lounge, and I see 12 young people, probably in their 19, 20, 21-year-olds, sitting around a big circle, and they'd all ordered tea. The whole tea was displayed on this table for 12 people. So I went over, I said, "Excuse me." I said, "How many of you 12 people are staying in the hotel?" So 2 of them put their hand up. I said, "Right." I said, "You'll all have to pay for this." Oh, they squealed like mad. They didn't want to know, but in the end I made them pay. Of course, some of them were staying in other Jewish hotels, and they said, "But our friends come to our hotel as well." But some of them were not staying in any Jewish hotels. They were staying in boarding houses or with friends in Bournemouth, and they came out for their freebies. After that, I went to my father. I said, "Dad," I said, "where in the world can you get something for nothing?" I said, "Only in Bournemouth, in the Jewish hotels." He said, "What do you mean?" I explained to him. I said, "This is ridiculous." I said, "We're giving stuff away here, food and drink and God knows what, entertainment to people who are not staying here." He said, "Yeah, but they go around." I said, "Forget that." I said, "We're losing a lot of money." He said, "Well, we can't do it on our own. We can't be the only ones." I said, "Okay, let's call a meeting of all the hoteliers, the Jewish hotels, and let's discuss it with them." So we called a meeting. Ruby Mary came, Faye Schneider, Maury Guild, all the main hoteliers. We had a meeting. I explained to them what it was all about. In the end, they agreed. So from that day onwards, everybody who came, who wasn't staying in the hotel, they have to come in, they can sit down, talk to their friends. If they ordered anything, or their friends ordered anything for them, they had to pay. So, of course, we started to institute a signing system like every hotel does for their cup of tea or whatever it was. And our guests were in revolt. They say, "I'm not signing anything. You don't trust me?" Of course we didn't. So we made them sign. Eventually they got used to it. So what next? Tremendous value. You know, I look back now, and the value the Jewish hotels in Bournemouth gave in those years, for 2, 3, even 5, when you were up to £5 a day, whatever it was, what they had, all these meals, all these extras, the entertainment, bands every night, all this stuff was fantastic. I don't think, pound for pound, I don't think there was a better value than those golden years of the Jewish hotels. Now, in those years, as I said before, there were no credit cards, and very few people had checkbooks, believe it, this was soon after the war. Some people had bank accounts, obviously. But mostly, Jewish people paid in cash. It's all under the mattress. And as I said before, I trained in accountancy. I was really on the accounting side of the business. And every Sunday, the checkout day, we had like 100 people checking out, whatever it was. I was in the office, back office, and people used to come in and pay their bills. In those years, we had no computers, no accounting. Everything was done by hand. And it was difficult. I remember one Sunday, the door was closed. Come in. Little old lady comes in. Oh, Mrs. Levy, how are you? She says, I'm leaving today. I said, yes, I believe you are. So I said, you've come for your bill? She says, yes, why not? I've got to pay my bill. So she says, how much do I owe you? So I look on the bill. I said, she'd been here a week or something. I said, you owe £25, 4 and 6, according to the bill. She says, okay. She says, you don't mind cash? I said, no, of course not. Well, everybody pays me. So with that, she picked up a skirt. She picks out 5 white, remember the old £5 notes? She took out 5 white pound sheets. So she hands them to me. Do I have to count this? And I counted it. And that's what we used to have to put up with in those years. But she was a lovely lady, anyway. In those years, there was no internet, no mailing. So we did everything. There was no teletext, no faxes, no mail shots, as we do these days. Well, one advert in the Jewish Chronicle was all we needed to fill the hotel. And of course, every Friday, there was always a JC advert. And when it came to Pesach, in fact, the first year that my parents opened the Cumberland, we had one large advert in the JC, and the hotel was full up. Today, the young Jewish kids today, when I talk to them, they say, what's all the fuss about these Jewish hotels in Bournemouth during those years? Yeah, today we go here, we go there, we go abroad, we go to America, we go to Thailand, we go to Australia, we go to South. And they've done it all by the age of 21. And they don't understand what the thing was about Jewish hotels in Bournemouth. I think most of you here will understand. It was a social scene. It was the way we grew up. It was the way we met people, a lot of our life, not me personally because I lived there, but in those years, a lot of the Jewish people's life was centered around going on holiday, especially to Bournemouth, to the Jewish hotels, where they met friends, relatives, they made shidduchs, they said we had bar mitzvahs there, we had even weddings in the garden, and so on. It was a whole way of life. Unfortunately, it's no longer. How are we doing for time? We did a lot of charity weekends. Can't remember all the names, but we did a lot of the groups came from London, from Manchester, and they came down with their groups, and we gave away weekends prizes, and that was a very big scene for a long time. I remember one particular time, people often ask me, what happens if you have a death in a room, in a hotel? You have to deal with it. You get the body out as quickly as possible. And this happened, I remember, Erev Pesach. Somebody had arrived a bit early, and that night he died. So we had to schlep the body out, down the back lift, clean the room up, and got on the phone to somebody else who was on the cancellation list and said, we've got a room, would you like to come? And they came. They were none the wiser. But if the room was clean, it had been, it was fine. And that's what we did. Now, very quickly, I know I'm running out of time. I have another few minutes. This was all fine. I said, little did they know what would happen in the future. The first cracks in the solid business appeared in the 1960s. It was the advent of cheap package holidays to Mallorca and to southern Spain. And then, of course, after the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, Israel opened up after Jerusalem was captured. The Sunday-to-Sunday bookings became any 7 days, then 5 days, then any combination, and gaps appeared in the summer season, and the Jewish holidays and the weekends were not what they used to be. And then we had to go out then and sell the hotels. We did deals for the children, we did special packages, but it was, the Jewish hotels were on their way out at that time. You know, the jumbo jets were going all around the world. Remember Laker Holidays, Laker Travel, his jets going to Florida? That was very cheap package holidays. That was one of the first things, plus all the things to Mallorca and southern Spain. Very quickly, gambling. I mentioned gambling before, so the Jews are big gamblers. My father, he loved to play cards. He had a gin rummy school where for 3 or 4 nights every week he had his friends coming around to play gin rummy. And he had a little book which used to record it. I'm not a gambler. My wife will testify. I don't play. We play bridge, that's about it. Not for money. And my father had a little book where he used to record all his winnings, but he never recorded his losses. So my mother, if she looked in the book, she couldn't see it. So one night, he used to play till late at night. So this game went on till about 5 o'clock in the morning. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, we had a house at the back of the hotel, lovely house. At 5 o'clock in the morning, Dad had finished his game, and dawn was just breaking, and he went over to the house, and he went up to the bedroom, and he started to undress, and he used to wear braces in those days, took his braces down, take his trousers off. All of a sudden, my mother woke up. Isaac? He said, yes, Bloomer. He said, where are you going? He said, well, I'm just going over to the hotel because I'm going to see if I go early, I'll catch all those Ganavim who are taking all the stuff from our store. So Isaac, very good idea. You go. So he had to put his trousers back on, jacket back on, back to the hotel. Later years, she said, I knew he'd just come in. I knew it. But I wanted to make him go. Fashion. In those days, everybody had to wear a jacket and tie in the restaurant. Nobody could come in without a jacket or a tie. Okay? Nowadays, they come in trainers and T-shirts, who knows. And one week, on the Sunday, arrived a young couple who would obviously have been married a few years, and we had a family table. Remember the family table, Cyril, the family table? Gary? We all sat there, and this gentleman sitting now, whose face is very familiar to me. There's a table there, and this young couple was sitting there. This was actually after my father died. And it must be in the 1970s, yes, because Dad died in 1969, it was early 70s. And this young man had long hair, right, to his shoulder, which was the fashion in those years. If you looked at the football games in those years, all the footballers had, now they got tattoos. And those years, they all had long hair. So my mother said to me, she says, you see that man over there, the young man with the young girl, the young woman? I said, yes. He's got long hair. I said, so? She said, why has he got long hair? I said, you go and ask him, Mum. How do I know why? It's just the fashion. So she said, I don't like it. He shouldn't be allowed in the restaurant. What do you mean he shouldn't be allowed? It's ridiculous. So from then on, the rest of the week, she drove me in Meshiga every mealtime. I don't know what he's doing. I tell you what, maybe he should go to the Majestic. He shouldn't stay here. Let him stay in the Majestic. I said, Mum, just leave. You're driving me nuts over this young man. He looks a very nice young man. So he's got long hair, so what? Come Shabbos, Susan came in. I went to shul in the morning. Susan came in with our my son was already in boarding school. He came in with our two daughters for lunch, which they usually did, okay? And my mother, towards the end of the meal, my mother asked our waiter, oh, I'd like some boiling water, lemon water, boiling water, lemon in it, right? He said, okay, so he comes over, and as he's coming to the table, he suddenly trips, and the glass of boiling hot water went all over my daughter Juliet's arm. She had bare arm, and she was crying her eyes out, and it was really bad. And then all of a sudden, this young man with the long hair comes over. He says, let me look at it. So we're looking at it. He says, don't worry, I'm a doctor. He said, let me look at it. So he looks at it. He said, yes, it's fine. I'll put some stuff on. I'm here another couple of days, so I'll make sure. I'll keep an eye on it, and she'll be fine. Don't worry about it. So I said, thank you very much, Doris. Very nice of you. So he goes back to his table. So my mother says, oi, what a lovely man. So I said to Mum, all the week you've been driving him a sugar that he should be in the Majestic. He's got long... I said such a thing? So in those years, when we had, my father died in 1969, and during that period of time, before he died, we bought the Majestic from Mrs. Schneider. So we were running 2 Jewish hotels. So we had 2 Jewish hotels, 2 rabbis, 2 shuls, 2 yonters. Beth Din license had to be renewed every year. And in those years, up to then, we used to serve non-kosher wines. It was allowed. And then one year, Rabbi Silva, I think it was, who was the Beth Din, the Kashrus Commission examiner, came down. He said, you've got to stop serving, you can only serve kosher wine. Now remember, this was before the Israeli wine industry took off. They ever had a few vineyards, but nothing special. And there was very little, all you had was Paul Wynn and something else, I can't remember what the other one was, and that was about it. I said, you can't do that. By this time, we were already losing business. I said, if you do that, Rabbi, I said, you're going to lose the rest of our customers. You can start introducing this. It will be very expensive, and you won't get the choice that they have now. So in the end, I won the day, and they decided not to implement it. But once, later in years, we sold the Cumberland, they then brought in that thing. But nowadays, of course, it's fine, because you can get kosher wines, not only from Israel, but from all over the world. In 1984, it was decided it was time to sell the Cumberland, as the era of Jewish hotels, to my sadness, was finished. And we sold it in 1984, in May 1984. By that time, some of the other hotels had already been sold. The Normandy is the only hotel which is still being run as a Jewish hotel, and as you know, it's very Haredi. I'm not sure if many of the people I look around at now would be happy staying there, but it serves a particular market. And of course, there is a Lebarge Hotel run by a Lubavitcher rabbi in Bournemouth, which is fine. The other hotels were all sold or developed as blocks of flats. And we sold the Cumberland in May 1984, and my mother decided it was time she retired. I think she was 75 when that happened, or 76. She'd had a wonderful run. She cried her eyes out because she was a wonderful hostess. As I said earlier on, the minute she saw somebody the minute she saw people she knew, she went over them straight away to find out they were fine. She looked after them the rest of their stay, and even the people she didn't know, within 5 minutes, she knew their whole life story. She knew who they were, what they did, who their relatives were, and she made them as comfortable as possible. I must tell you one other funny, I'm nearly finished. I'm okay, I know it's going on long. One other story. Well, I don't know whether I should tell this one. Yes, I'll tell it. My wife will look disapproving. One stage, some years before we closed, we decided to refurbish the hotel somewhat, which we did, again. And we refurbished the two cloakrooms, the gents' and the ladies' toilets. My sister had a hand in it, and she decided the ladies' toilet, it's on the ground floor, the public toilets, she decided to put in, for ladies, we had 3 cubicles of toilets, so she bought 3 beautiful wine buckets so the ladies could put their soiled garments in when they finished. One Sunday, my mother was standing on the big checkout. She was standing by the front door, and the lady was coming towards her, and she was holding 2 of these wine buckets. She says, "Excuse me, madam." She says, "Those come from the toilet." She says, "Oh, well, I thought you didn't want them anymore." She says, "You better go and put them back straight away." And the lady did. I mean, we had to watch. You know, Charles 40, when he ran 40 hotels, they had an advert saying every month they had a series of adverts. This year we lost 50,500 teaspoons, right? Because that was a good advert. Everybody went to their hotel, they all took teaspoons from 40 hotels. The same way in the Jewish hotels, they didn't take teaspoons, they took things from the toilets. Anyway, I think I've more or less finished now. It was a wonderful era, something will never be repeated. We see a lot of it now in the Jewish hotel, in the Israeli hotels, all Jewish of course, Israeli hotels, but it's not the same, and it will never be the same. And people ask me, would I ever want to do it again? I think so. It had a lot going for it. I always wanted to be a singer more than anything else, but that never materialized, so I became a hotelier instead. Anyway, thank you all for listening so patiently to me. I've enjoyed speaking to you, and I hope to see you again sometime. Thank you very much. Sorry?
Can we take some points from the audience?
Oh, yes, sorry, yes. Anybody wants to ask me questions?
Yeah.
With greatest pleasure. Yes,
I'd like to thank Geoffrey, first of all, before we take the questions. I think you've given a new dimension to the term habeas corpus in your story about the body. One story that you might not know about is at the ambassadors, the weights and measures people used to take their trainees, tell them it was the first hotel to go to. And when they got there, they said, "We've come here to test your pumps." And the owners there would say, "But we don't have any," because the Jews don't drink. And they'd say, "Well, don't mess around, you know, we've got lots of hotels to go to." And they searched around the hotel, and genuinely they found there were no pumps there. Anyway, some questions. Introduce yourself and...
May I ask, my name's Geoffrey Roth, why was the lift so small, only holds 3 people?
Actually, from my recollection, it was 4. But never mind. Well, yes, you're right. Unfortunately, the structure of the hotel was put in, obviously, before my parents bought the hotel. And one of the most expensive things that you can put in any building is a lift. And frankly, there wasn't the room. If you go in the Cumberland today, it's still only the one lift. Because to put another, you'd have to take something away somewhere else and put another lift in. It's a big job, and you lose a lot of space.
Can I just ask you, what was the name of the man who jointly financed the purchase of the hotel?
His name was Joe Lippmann, Lipman. Actually, after a few years, my parents, after he died a few years later, and he was a very good friend, he was a lovely man, he was a very good friend of my father. But after he died, my parents bought out the rest of the hotels. After a few years, the Lippmann family weren't involved anymore in the hotel. Cyril.
Geoffrey, thank you very much indeed for the most amazing presentation. I well remember your parents, rest in peace. Your mum was a human dynamo.
Absolutely.
And of the many, many memories, happy memories that I had of Bournemouth, Particularly, it was the Seder nights at Sidorim, where men, it was obligatory to have to wear evening dress, and all the women came in their finery.
Absolutely.
There must have been about 300 to 400 people.
We did 300 or 400
literally
Seder
from all around the world. And my late father, Shalom, had to cater for so many different tastes. And it was glittering, it was literally a glittering evening.
It certainly was.
For my sins, over a number of years, I actually took the Sidorim.
Yes, I remember, of course you
Cumberland,
did, that's right.
So much so that they had one Seder in the main dining room, and at the same time, simultaneously, they had another Seder in the ballroom.
In the ballroom. There were two Seders,
And the point I used to remember is that within a half an hour after Pesach finished, my late father-in-law, Alex, was already serving salt beef.
Absolutely.
Oozing with schmaltz and mustard.
It's amazing.
And the other very happy memory I have is that when our children, David and Michelle, used to attend on Shabbat and used to have the most amazing buffet kiddush. David and Michelle used to hide under the tablecloth, which covered the table, and smoke salmon sandwiches and fish balls. And surreptitiously, they used to put their hand up and eating. There was plenty left after that.
Lovely.
But it was something that stayed with us throughout our lives. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's nice. Lovely, lovely memories. Actually, you had to be very careful when you went to the buffet, because you went too quickly. You got a fork in your hand. Michelle.
Actually, I also have wonderful, wonderful memories. My whole childhood, I had the most incredible time in the Cumberland. And I must apologise. Please forgive me. My brother and I used to actually hide under the tables, the tablecloth covering us, and under the tables there were a few layers, trays of smoked salmon, spares that they would use to put up, but we polished it all off. So I'm really, really sorry. I hope you forgive us. But we had really fantastic memories. Thank you.
It's really nice. Thank you. Lovely story.
I'm Robert Brodie.
Hi, Robert.
And for many years, about 12 years, I was honoured and privileged to be able to take the services Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur with Cyril doing the Shabbos. I did Musaf. And that was after I got banned from taking the services in Kenton, because like everybody else, we used to push the buggy on Teshuvah and Shabbos morning. Anyway, it was the best thing that happened to me. But one thing I remember, and I was initially horrified about, was that Kol Nidre, the JIA appeal, where I think Bournemouth raised more per capita than anyone else in the country, people used to stand up and say exactly what they were going to donate. And initially I was horrified by that. It was so embarrassing. I thought it would be embarrassing. But because people were at a hotel and away from home, if somebody didn't give, it didn't mean they didn't give. So it didn't have the normal horror that would be associated these days with such an auction. And I was very pleased to know how much was raised. And I remember taking Musaf on Yom Kippur, on the day of the Yom Kippur War, when the news started filtering through. And it's one of those things in life that you remember what you were doing and where you were. And first we thought, oh, the Israelis, they're clever, they're waiting, and then they'll put this pincer attack in, and it didn't happen. But that was a memorable time for me. I thank you all for having me.
Thank you. I remember your services so well. It's a great voice, great chazanot.
I believe, Jeffrey, you also have a story about two ladies talking among themselves, saying, and the food was terrible and such small portions.
Can't win them all.
Now, Jeffrey has mentioned my Bournemouth connection. The other person with the Bournemouth connection here is Rabbi Shisler. He was the rabbi for both of us. There was a tradition that besides the wardens and the president and vice president, sometimes the life president would sit in the box. And when the late Sam Marks sat in the box when I was the warden there, we were known as Marks and Spencer. I'd like now to call on Rabbi Shisler now to propose the vote of thanks.
Michelle is here. So Spencer, Sam Marks' daughter is here.
Right, yes.
Michelle. Do you want to say something, Michelle? She wants to say something. The gentleman who just talked about Sam Marks, my old colleague, trustee, It's his daughter, Rochelle.
And I was your secretary for the JIA
Absolutely.
in '67. I remember as a resident that the Bournemouth hotels were amazing for us, for all the charity functions we have. The BBYO and the B'nai B'rith was very, very vibrant, and the hotels really was a great asset for the community, and we all enjoyed taking part, and I didn't have to. I could get in even when they had the residents only festival. And your mother was amazing, as was Faye Schneider and Sarah Marriott.
Absolutely.
And I think the three of them were quite an amazing threesome. And they all had the most enormous school friends. Because everybody who came, they were at school with.
Yes. Actually, it's fun. I was speaking to a friend of mine. I went up for tea the other day, a guy called Gerald Wayner, who lost his father some years ago, quite a few years ago. And he said, you know, all of a sudden, he said, I was sitting Shiver. He lives in the Albany, which is the big block of flats in Bournemouth, most of you know. And he said, the doorbell rang. We opened the door, and who should walk in? He said, your mother, Mrs. Marriott, Sarah Marriott, and Mrs. Selby from the Ambassador's Hotel. He said, and they came to all of them to wish me, you know, long life, what have you. He said, for the next half an hour, he said, I only regretted not having a tape recorder. He said, those three ladies, he said, it was an experience just to hear them talk about the Jewish hotel business and all the people that came in. He said it was absolutely fascinating.
My wife Anne and I came to Bournemouth in 1993. I went down as the rabbi there. And the time we got there were only 2 kosher hotels left. There was the Normandy and the new Ambassadors. It was called the New Ambassadors. Although I think there was more sticky tape on the carpets going up the stairs than I've got in my study, I think, on a roll. But prior to that, of course, over the years, we had been to Bournemouth. I remember when we didn't go on our honeymoon all those years ago, but about Anne was pregnant with our first son, with Daniel, and we stayed at Mount Aishel.
Oh, I remember.
That was Tony and Rose Wicklow. And I remember there was a little boy there who wanted to know if we were on our honeymoon, even though my wife had a big tummy, can they know? But what was very interesting, as Jeffrey actually mentioned already, it wasn't a supervised hotel. It was a Milchik hotel, Mount Aishel, but it wasn't supervised. And somebody told me that at one time there were at least 30 Jewish establishments, hotels, small ones, in Bournemouth. We stayed at the Grosvenor, where the Lukovers, they put us in the bridal suite, although we'd been married about 10 years. And I think we must have stayed at your hotel for a bar mitzvah. We came down for a Shabbos, had a fantastic, actually amazing weekend there. Now, of course, it's all gone. People still go to Bournemouth, but you know, the average age in Bournemouth is quite high, as you probably know. And they say that's because people go to Bournemouth to die. When they get there, they forgot what they came for. And it's still true. I think it's still true. It's a lot to do with the trees. You know, it's very soporific down there. Anyway, I must tell you, Jeffrey, I've thoroughly enjoyed hearing you this evening. For those people who knew those days very well, I'm sure this has been very evocative. For those people who didn't know it so well, it's been very entertaining and lovely to hear about. And we thank you very, very much, and Susan, for making this journey to London. Of course, we all know it's much further from Bournemouth to London than it is from London to Bournemouth. That's what the Bournemouthians will tell you.
Yes.
So on behalf of everybody, I want to thank you very much for a lovely, lovely, entertaining evening. On behalf of all of us, I want to give you a little chayim.
Thank you very much.
And also, Spencer's asked me to tell you that we're going to make a donation to the Hannah Levy Home as well, which we know is very close to your hearts.
Well,
on behalf of everybody, thank you very much indeed.
That's very nice. Susan will appreciate that. Susan is the senior trustee of our old age home, the Hannah Levy Home in Bournemouth. and she'll really appreciate. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
No, they can't take that away from me. No, they can't take that away. No, they can't take that away. They can't take that away from me.